There are many things in life that are better when they're shorter. Just take a look at Adam Sandler's IMDb page. We can also take the same logic and apply it to the length of your strumming motion. So I want to talk a little bit about what you can do to kind of tighten up the stroke in your strumming hand, right? So what I mean by that is everybody has kind of like a natural arc when they're starting out to how far the pick actually moves up and down when you're strumming, right? So we're just going to take a regular C chord, right? And maybe when you're first starting out, almost everybody uses a little too much arm, a little too much elbow when they're strumming, right? So it sounds like this. And all that motion, you're creating a lot of inefficiencies with, right? So like when you go down and you start here, there's this much space outside of the string set, and when you come back up, it's way up here. And what this does, it leads to kind of like a muddy sounding dynamic that you have going on, right? So sometimes you can't even really differentiate some of the chords. You can just hear kind of like a pick on a string or your thumbs or whatever. And it's just kind of like a jumbled mess at first, right? Kind of like cowboy campfire players is kind of like an example a lot of people use in this kind of playing, right? So what you want to be able to do is create some kind of process by which you can break up the string set into little pieces that you can hit. It's called dynamic playing. Now, dynamic playing is kind of tricky at first because I think a lot of people think of it as just the force of your pick, right? So again, if you're just playing the same C chord, you can dynamically hit it a little bit harder and then back off and go a little softer, right? And that's great, but I think in the context of a song, when you're changing chords a lot and you're thinking about your fretting hand a lot, it can be hard to also think about hitting something harder and softer. So the reason you want to be able to tighten up your stroke is because you can control the dynamics just by aiming at a certain thing, right? Like if you hit all 6 strings, that's going to be a louder dynamic than if you only hit 3 strings with the same force. It's just simple science, just because only half the amount of strings are resonating, right? So you want to be able to make a system in which if you want to hit just 3 strings of a chord, you can always aim for 3 and just hit 3. If you want 4, aim for 4 and just hit 4. If you want 2, and be able to do it, right? So this comes down to your muscle memory, and we're going to talk about some effective ways you can train your muscle memory. Now, the one thing that's very controversial, depending on who you talk to, in working on muscle memory is the concept of having a floating picking hand or strumming hand, or a fixed one with an anchor, right? Or a bridge or something like that, right? So a lot of people will tell you that it's bad form to have some kind of anchor. And when I say anchor, it's either maybe you have like your outside fingers anchored to the body of the guitar, or maybe like your palm or the side of your hand fixed to the bridge. And what you're doing there is you're giving yourself a fixed reference point that you can always come back to. So like for example, like if we just take like the fingers right here, right? So if I have this attached to the body of the guitar, basically all I have to do is this much power gives me 2 strings, this much gives me 3 strings, this much gives me 4 strings, and that fixed point is something you can always come back to. Now, is this good or bad? I really don't see it as a bad thing as long as you're wary or you kind of understand a certain few things about how it works, right? What you don't ever want to have is tension in your hand at all, right? So sometimes, like what bad form would be on anchoring is if you have your fingers really stiff like this, and when you're playing, you're really kind of feeling the tension in your hand right now. You can do it where you're touching the body of the guitar, but still be kind of have like a free-flowing motion, right? See, if you look at my fingers right there, they're not really stiffly against the body, but they're kind of giving it a reference point, right? Another one would be your wrist, right? Now, this is actually something that I personally do, and I don't think it's ever really caused me any kind of harm. It works just fine. And a lot of the best players in the world do some kind of anchoring type thing, like Petrucci, Malmsteen, even like super fast shredder guys do it. Matt Bellamy does it a lot. So I don't really think it's a bad thing as long as it's not creating undue tension in your hand, right? So let's talk about the one where you put your wrist on the bridge a little bit, right? Now, this is something that could also help you with palm muting. What I'm doing there is I'm just kind of having the side of my hand hit the bottom of the strings here, right? So I'm not letting the strings resonate. So this is one type of dynamic control. But aside from that, you can still have them ring out completely by keeping your hand anchored here, right? So what this is doing for me, if I'm playing this way, is I'm taking the same C chord, right? And I maybe just kind of memorizing the stroke in my wrist that 2 strings will go. So if you try something like this, if it's comfortable for you, just try to focus on hitting 2 strings. And it's not even about the strings. It's more about memorizing this movement to get your pick from here to here. It's not even really aiming so much as it is just feeling for those strings. So do this, try to get 2 strings, go for 3 strings, and go for 4 strings. Now, visually, it might not always be the same thing, so you want to use your ears to hear when you're getting more of the chord, right? And you can do the same thing if you want to try bracing with your fingers, right? Now, the opposite of bracing would be to have some kind of floating technique going on, where your hand is just kind of free floating, so this is going to offer you the most amount of versatility as far as what you want to be able to do because you're not constricted in any way, shape, or form, right? It's the exact same thing. Float in a way where you can train the muscle memory of how hard you have to hit this to get 2 strings, 3 strings, 4, 5, 6, right? Now, one interesting thing about floating is that, especially when I've found when I'm sitting and playing, my strumming arm kind of comes into play. Like where I rest my arm on the body of the guitar plays a big role in the available room I'll have to move my strumming hand, right? So if I'm right here, if I'm really anchoring my hand now instead of my wrist or hand or whatever, my arm. So if I have it right here, then the maximum amount I can go is right here. So this is a good spot for me because I'm comfortable, there's no tension in my arm, everything is loose and free to kind of do whatever. But I can't get too far away. Like literally the most I can do while having my arm on the guitar here is right here. To go any farther, I would have to move my whole arm down, right? So it's really just finding a spot that's comfortable. Whether it's floating, whether it's anchoring, it doesn't matter. As long as you're comfortable with it, that's what I want you to work on, right? So one thing that is really good at training yourself to get this muscle memory down and to kind of find out how hard you have to hit 2 strings is by hitting chords within the string set. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a power chord and we're going to root it on 5D. So your pointer finger is going to be the 5th fret on the D string, and then either your ring finger or your pinky is going to be the 7th fret on the G string, right? So just like that, right? Now, I want you to try to go up and down, trying to just hit the 2 inside strings. And I think this is a really good way to practice exactly that movement that gets you that 2 strings, right? Because a very similar movement is going to get you 2 strings, either G and B and E, etc., right? So at first it may sound like this. And if you move it even farther, right, so this is the 6th fret, that's a good place to do too, because if you accidentally hit the A or the B string, it'll just sound really bad, right? So you want to do it in a way where maybe at first it's kind of like this, and then you can hear over time getting it really cleanly, right? So you can do this with any 2 strings, right? If you want to maybe start out with like a power chord on the E and the A string, just start out doing that. And then go down a string. And then down another string. And then down another string. Now this one, if you do a power chord starting on the G string, you're actually going to end up with a flat 5, right? So you want to compensate by moving your pinky out one more. So for just the G string rooted power chord, we're having a 3 fret span between the 2. So you can kind of like alter this exercise in any way, but I just want you to be working on the dynamics, but instead of using force and power dynamics, aim for pieces of a chord. And it can be any chord. It can just be like a regular open G chord, right? And to kind of make this sound more dynamic, so I would say that's kind of like a fairly dynamic, simple strumming pattern where I'm just going down and up on an open chord. But I'm not using any different force. The force in my strumming hand is staying exactly the same. It's just which strings I'm choosing to hit. So the pattern that we're going to use here is in a waltz. And for me, I think strumming in a waltz is a good way to hear the stuff a little better because the accents on a waltz, just for me personally, tend to stick out more. So I'll just show you, right? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So every 3 strokes, I'm working my way through. So maybe the first stroke, 1, 2, 3. I'm kind of going through the string set as I'm counting. 1, 2, 3. Right? I'm hitting just these little pieces of the G chord. I'm not changing the chord at all. I'm just kind of focusing, tightening my stroke within it. 1, 2, 3. And then the second set of 3, I'm going to go from the top lower. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Go to C. Back to G. So for me, it was always harder to kind of focus on hitting things harder and softer until I got a better feel for strumming and rhythm playing in general. So I just think that it's a good idea to just maybe aim for pieces of a chord and to kind of work that into your playing in a very smooth, even tempoed way. Just always down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Because then you can still open up a little bit more brain activity to concentrate on what's going on with your fretting hand, because having to make the compromise of which hand to watch or whatever is really kind of like a challenge when you're starting out. And so often we kind of neglect what your strumming hand is actually doing. So just kind of doing a couple things like this, whether you're anchored, floating, bracing with your hands, whatever, however you want to do it, as long as it's comfortable and there's not a overdue amount of tension in any part of your strumming arm, hand, or wrist, then you're going to be improving, and before you know it, you're going to be able to kind of feel out all these things. You're not going to have to think about any of these, and you're just going to play with great feel and become a great rhythm guitar player.